Yeah, Cork in the 80s is a place now I think of in black and white. When I think of the 80s, I think of quite a grey city at the time. It was a city under wraps, really. It was a city going through hard times. You had the closure of Ford's, the closure of Dunlop's. It was before Apple really came in.
So there were long unemployment lines. There was a sense of depression about the place. People were poor. Everybody wore wet duffel coats, as I recall. It was a depressed kind of a place.
Cork was an extremely conservative place at the time in the early 80s. It was a very monocultural place, very white, very Catholic.
So, for example, at that time it was reasonably difficult to get hold of contraceptives, for example, which probably younger viewers would find very surprising now. And so there was one family planning clinic in Cork, and if you got to get an appointment there, then you would be able to get contraceptives. Otherwise, you had to go to your GP and hope for the best.
The situation for gay men at the time and lesbians at the time in Ireland was pretty awful, really.
You know, it's worth stating that it was against the law to be a gay man at the time. It was criminalised, which was extraordinary.
For example, when I was young, when I was a teenager into my late teens, there were no lesbian icons or role models, or we'd never heard of lesbians actually, and I'd never heard of lesbian or gay people, other than various stereotype people who were denigrated. You know, the sense, there was a sense of these people are depraved.
Everything was kind of controlled. You know, the Catholic Church was in control. When Corpus Christi took place in Cork, the whole city shut down. The city council marched in their robes behind all the bishops and the monks and the priests. The army marched with them. The Gardaí marched with them. The large business people marched with them. And we all watched them do that. And it was like a real statement of, we are all together, church and state and business, we are together, and we're controlling everything. You don't have to do anything, just be good boys and girls and everything will be fine. And it was a way like that.
It was good and bad. Actually, by the time of the early 80s, significant changes were already underway in Ireland, partly thanks to joining the European Union, but mainly because of activist groups in Ireland. So there were a lot of kind of activist groups working in different areas, but they weren't really coming together. And that's one of the things that the Quay Co-op could do, was to bring people together from across different areas.
Sometimes when I'm talking to younger people now, I think we felt, and when I say we now, I mean a lot of people, I think we felt much more empowered despite how badly the country was doing. It was kind of like, you kind of felt like you could make a difference. Now, you know, how much difference you could actually make was another matter. It was like the governance of the country was easier to imagine and to engage with. It wasn't this monolith, you know. You could actually kind of have a go.
Cork was parochial and a bit stolid, but a significant marker in my memory of Cork was the return to Cork of Arthur Leahy and his then partner, Laurie, and they came back to Cork to do something.
I suppose it was an idea that was kind of with both Laurie, my partner at the time, and myself. I lived in London for 25 years before coming back to Cork. Both of us had been involved with the emerging community centres in London. Centerprise was the one we were mostly involved with. which was a bit like what the co-op eventually became to be, was a kind of a centre with as a focal point for energies within the community. So it was out of that kind of experience, I think, that we then began to look at what would be possible to do in Cork. And we had spoken with a wide range of people around the city.
We thought, wow, this is ambitious. We have no money. Half of us are unemployed. And they're talking about getting a building, getting a huge building, because getting everybody involved, not just the women, but also all the political left, the radical, the alternatives, the ecological people, the anti-nuclear, the green movement, and the youth movement, and bringing us all together in this building. Where's the money going to come from?
All of that money really came from small donations or loans. And it came from then fundraising events.
And then Laurie was also cycling around looking at any empty or possible building.
And we eventually came to the building in Sullivan's Quay, and it was an old pawnbroker's. We managed to get that building really because nobody else wanted it.
And Arthur and Laurie and others, there was a group of people there who actually had building skills and knew what they were up to. So they took a wreck of a building that had been, well, it wasn't derelict, but it certainly had been neglected. And so they took it and they transformed it through hard work mainly, and using all kinds of materials that they could lay their hands on, into a fantastic space.
It was in an awful run-down state. I mean, you would be half afraid to walk on the stairs. And there were a bunch of us, including my partner at the time. We got involved in the physical renovation of the building. So it was literally like a building project in here. And it was men and women. And I mean, it's definitely health and safety. Nobody wore hard hats or high-vis vests.
Well, I remember I was a student up in UCC at the time and got a phone call from Arthur, who I'd met and made it my business to meet because he was an interesting chap. And he said, we've got this project, we've bought a building, we're trying to convert it, and we need people to help. So can you come down and can you get people to come down? So I was involved in the Students' Union at the time, so a bunch of us came down, and Arthur sort of put a paintbrush into our hands, or taught me how to make plaster and apply it to walls, and it was all a bit ramshackle, but great fun. And it was a project that was exciting, and we did get behind it because the fact that it was a cooperative, the fact that there was going to be a restaurant and a bookshop and meeting places for organisations.
So I was a teenage activist, so I'd been involved in anti-nuclear movements and had been involved in setting up Cork Youth Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. And I was also a vegetarian a few years at that time. So I'd been kind of around the kind of activist scenes in Cork as a teenager. So Arthur Leahy roped myself and Tony O'Donoghue in to paint the walls of the basement, I think it was, before it opened.
The building was taken sometime in early March. There was 6 weeks of work put into it, and then the co-op opened then officially on the 1st of May, 1982.
I still to this day get butterflies in my stomach when I think of the day that it opened. We thought a lot of people would want this space because we knew there were lots of movements around Cork, everybody was looking for a home. But really what people were looking for was kind of a heart and soul. And this place became the pulse really of what was going on in kind of separate little groupings outside of the building. And the place was heaving. I mean, if the walls could move, if the walls could talk, it happened on that day. Up to the roof, there was a line of people in both directions because everybody wanted to see every nook and cranny. What's here? This is the women's space, or this is where the housing co-op will be. This is where a bookshop will be, or the food co-op, or the restaurant. It was just amazing. I remember at one stage turning to Arthur saying, "Arthur, do you think the floors will collapse?"
Within the co-op here, there was a whole range of different strands, environmental, political groups. There was 3 or 4 different political groups at the time. And then there were people who were just kind of generally interested in something different. They were looking for something other than the kind of generally oppressive nature of Irish society at the time.
It was just really exciting. You know, there was an awful lot of energy there. And it was a time when people were trying to change things, and it gave the impression that you actually could change things, that you didn't have to accept things the way they were, that you could actually make a difference.
Well, there were a lot of women who were quite feminist in outlook. There were a mixture of people who were lesbian, gay, heterosexual. At the time, there wasn't a whole lot of identification around people being trans, but, you know, there were definitely people who were political. There were people who, you know, what was one of the nice things about that kind of plurality is there were people who found it hard to fit in elsewhere, and they weren't excluded here.
It was kind of vital for the lesbian and gay community in Cork. It was the origin of a huge range of initiatives.
Like, there was a very strong group of people that were involved in the LGBT movement at the time. This was mostly gay men that were involved. There was about a dozen men who were kind of quite political and had a developing political sense.
So as a lesbian feminist, I aligned more with more radical gay men who were interested in feminist and socialist ambitions, who were ambitious in the sense of, I suppose, broadening the perspective that we had as marginalised people, as gay people or lesbian people. But that perspective gave us an insight into, I suppose, the kinds of things that are other kinds of things that are wrong, that were wrong as we saw it in Irish society. So I was more allied with gay men like Arthur and Laurie and John and Donal, Kieran Rose, Cathal Kerrigan. What the co-op gave me in those early days was a sense of tribe, a sense of community, a sense that my identity and myself was that I was a person of value and that I could flourish.
I grew up just up the hill behind here, so I've lived most of my life in this area. Went to school next door in Sullivan's Quay, and so in 1985 I was a 21-year-old unemployed gay carpenter, and I had come out to my family a couple of years previously, and that kind of went okay. But I was looking, I suppose, to find myself and to kind of make contact with the gay community in Cork, and I didn't know how to do that or where that was. I did come across an ad somewhere for a switchboard, and I rang the phone line, spoke to Donal, who invited me along to the Cork Gay Collective weekly meeting, which was on a Thursday night. I spent a couple of hours walking up and down Sullivan's Quay that Thursday night, and then went home, as a lot of people would tell similar stories. And but the following week I came here, and I came upstairs and went to the meeting to meet a bunch of kind of articulate gay men who weren't like where I was at the time, still in the closet, you know, and very, very, very unhappy and very uncomfortable because of the world I lived in, and I couldn't express who and what I was about. So to come in here and be kind of, and very much welcomed in, and to be part of that was huge. The 20th of June 1985, I always, like, that's the day I came to a meeting here, and my life, I describe that like as my life before that date and my life after it.
It was certainly had the feeling of something politically different and alternative. And I suppose given the context, the background context, and the whole, like where Ireland was at that point in the beginning of the 80s, it was the beginning of, you know, the the challenge, I suppose, to like authority into the Catholic Church in particular, and the legislation that went with that. So I think it was a microcosm of and encapsulated what was the beginning of social change in Ireland.
In the early days, it was like the first thing we did, I think, was to establish the restaurant, which was going to be the means of paying it was going to contribute to the overall. And then we put there was a second-hand clothes shop as well that was established, and clothes and other kind of bric-a-brac, the kind of shops that are now all over the city. That was, I think, one of the first ones in Cork at the time. Then there was a food co-op that was established in UCC, and that moved in downstairs, and that was another strand of support for the building.
We lived in St. Louis in Missouri, and my husband's Irish now, Vincent Tucker, but we were in a food co-op in St. Louis, so it was so nice. So when we came here, there was really nothing, so we initiated a food co-op at Joe Noonan's house on Greenmount, and then from there, it moved on down to the Quay Co-op.
So the food co-op was a members co-op. It was registered as a co-op in Dublin, and it was based probably on the American model of food cooperatives, where consumers and producers would deal directly with each other. And our model here then involved every member doing work, sharing in the work. So it was very much a cooperative effort in every sense. So we would buy in bulk, say from a local cheese factory or from local fruit and veg producers, and we would bring the food in here. We would have work sessions, a mehel if you like, where people would come in on a rota, bag the food, decant the olive oil, slice the cheese, package it all up, and we did it on a kind of a pre-order basis.
And then the members of the co-op could buy that food for a much cheaper rate than you could buy elsewhere, because it was so rare to be able to get access to that food. And then we would get letters from the organisers of the food co-op, which were signed Sam and Ella, because the two people who were involved were called Sam and Ella.
More people got involved, and once again, this great sense of community, It was really, really wonderful, yeah.
There was a little bit of a ferment. It was, in a way, people in business now talk about incubator units. It was like we had created our own incubator in this building. And so the types of enterprises and activities that were happening within here in those early days included a bookshop, a reasonably radical bookshop.
And the books, let's say this, the books that were available in the bookshop were not ones that you'd be going into Esa's bookshelves to buy. They were really a broad spectrum of books on a range of subjects.
The bookshop, I think, fulfilled a great need in Cork at the time. It was focused on lesbian and gay literature, both journals, political literature and fiction as well. Literature covering a range of socialist issues, ecological issues, vegetarian cookery books, and I suppose left-wing literature.
So you could get access to a huge amount of information that you couldn't get anywhere else.
Women's Place was here.
But the Women's Place, which was the part that I was involved with at the time, once we launched it, we used to run workshops up there, and that could be anything from I had some lessons in having hair, giving haircuts, and murdered a few people's hair along the way.
And that was a women-only space in the co-op on the second floor of the co-op, and it was of two rooms where there was a drop-in centre. You could get a cup of tea. There was information, particularly around women's health, because in the early 80s there was nothing, so it was really important to be able to offer that. And as well as that, there was a library, a women's library.
I think the women needed to have their own separate space to get their ideas more solidified, and then go to a mixed meeting so that they'd all have the same voice, kind of thing.
Like, we also set up a lesbian discussion group for lesbians only, so that lesbians could get together to talk about what were lesbian issues for them.
Unique in itself, never was done before, so it was kind of a pioneering kind of thing, really. So, and from that, a lot of things emerged just from the discussion. But we just used to meet on a Thursday night and talk about anything and everything, and then go to the pub.
1980s was this period of really intense political activism, particularly around sexuality and women's rights. And some of the women who were involved in that decided that as an antidote that we needed a weekend of fun. So in 1984, the first Women's Fun Weekend was organised. So during the day, there were activities in the Quay Co-op, and then in the evening there was a social in Connolly Hall. So that became an annual tradition that kind of would be still running today if we weren't in COVID, and hopefully will come back next year.
What became the Cork Rape Crisis Centre had its space here.
And they originally operated providing support to women who had been raped from the Women's Place. But they then felt they needed to move. They felt it wasn't a secure enough space to guard the kind of confidentiality of the people who were engaging with them. And I think particularly after the Special Branch raided the Quay Co-op.
Well, that was in 1984, and it came as a surprise to people who were working in the co-op because it wasn't considered a threat to state security. And I don't think it was. One has to contextualise this. During the 1980s, certainly in my experience, the left, and I'm talking about the radical left, in Cork and in Ireland generally, and the Republicans, were subject to continuous police harassment, special branch harassment. So left activists were routinely stopped in the streets, were searched, questioned and so on. But the Quay Co-op wouldn't have been seen by the state, by the special branch, as falling into that category of the subversive left as they would have seen it, and the subversive Republican movements.
It was our first engagement with the powers that be in the city, the local guard, and in fact they were I suppose they were kind of, at the time they were quite a heavy gang. You know, it was obviously related to the situation in Northern Ireland, but they were called the kind of heavy gang. You know,
Cork is a kind of close-knit, kind of small place, and so whether it was for the bookshop or for the cafe or for some of the meetings that were going on, people would have, people from various left backgrounds would have been visiting on the special branch, obviously keeping an eye out and I suppose they just wanted to nosy around.
But I think what attracted the attention of the police, the special branch, to the Quay Co-op was simply because a little campaign was established in 1984, People Against Repression. In other words, left groups came together in order to resist this ongoing police harassment, particularly around arrests. And very simply, this address was given as the meeting place for People Against Repression, erroneously, as it happens, within a left publication.
They searched the building, and they eventually, we used to have a bookshop downstairs, and we used to get donations of books. And one lad worked in the post office, and he left in a book which was about 30-year-old book on kind of phone exchanges or something. And they took this as a major element and released a bit in the paper.
And they took away the records of the membership of the food co-op, for example, among other things that they collected, a second-hand book from the bookshop and various other odds and ends. They went into the rape crisis room and there was a question about access to records there.
So we were stunned and bewildered, and I suppose we found it a little bit hilarious at the same time. There was something almost Flann O'Brien-ish about it.
We met with the local sergeant down in the Bridewell, and the kind of situation was resolved.
So they said, well, after every march in Cork City, everyone seemed to come back to the Quay Co-op. So that was the basis of this raid.
I tend to see that now in retrospect, and maybe even at the time, as a bit of a kick against something strange and different. and they wanted to know more about this, and this was a pretty heavy way of going about finding out. They could have come and spoken to us. This place was conscious, proud, visible, and all determinedly so. This was for a reason.
Let me just tell you, today is National AIDS Day, and the event that we're trying to set up is called Bridging the Gap. What we're trying to do is to create a human chain between Patrick's Bridge and Christy Ring Bridge here by the Alpha House. If you're passing by in a car and you can't stop to join us, we'd like you to blow your horn just to show some solidarity. Let's hear the sound of the horn. That's right, keep the horn blowing. Thank you. Keep it going. This is a very important event for Ireland.
And then, of course, HIV and AIDS came along, and it just, it'd be wrong to say that it decimated the situation, but it meant that some of the key people, myself included, moved to establishing the AIDS Alliance, which was, again, the more direct response to what was happening on the AIDS.
Again, that was emanating from the Quay Co-op, so the Cork activists were centrally involved in setting up Gay Health Action, which was the organisation that was set up to kind of gather information and share information. And for a period of time, they were the only ones doing this because there was government inactivity because it was seen as a gay disease, so they didn't need to really do anything about it. So it was down to the lesbian and gay communities and our allies to address the HIV and AIDS crisis. So people like Arthur Leahy and Kieran Rose would have been centrally involved in setting up Gay Health Action.
And in those days, we didn't have social media. So today, information is thrown at you. Google will send you, or Facebook will send you a message, hey, there's this new group doing, or they're organising a protest, would you be interested? In those days, that didn't happen. And the mainstream media wouldn't cover us. Like when we set up the Gay Collective, we got a box number, a PO box number. Well, we actually had to argue for that because they were like, who are this group? Cork Gay Collective. And the main newspaper in Cork at the time, it's now the Irish Examiner, but then it was called the Cork Examiner, they refused to use the word gay.
The needs of the community outgrew what could be accommodated within the buildings here in Sullivan's Quay, and we established a separate lesbian and gay centre.
And having that space facilitated a whole range of other activities to happen. And it was from the other place that we got involved in organising the first ever LGBT float and Patrick's Day parade anywhere, which was in Cork in 1992.
And it was marvellous because it was a time when there was a bit of controversy when lesbian and gay groups from in New York and in Boston had been banned from the St. Patrick's Day parades in those countries. And we were aware of it because it had been covered in the newspapers. And I remember going down, it was the first Patrick's Day parade I attended in years when I went down to support, and seeing the banner come along, and the banner said something to the effect of, hello Boston, hello New York, this is Cork. And everybody got it.
So we sang Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay right through the streets of Cork. And the reactions were really mixed, so with some people it was this stony silence. And for other people it was like confusion of what's this. But then I remember coming down the South Mall and seeing this little old lady jumping up and down, enthusiastically waving and going, "You're gorgeous."
And I think in the awards later, they won the best new float or something.
It's often quite difficult to describe what a cooperative is, but it's basically a group of people working together, who have a similar interest and are the owners of the organisation, in many ways.
It was really an attempt at having a democratic workspace and a democratic political space, and really that was the ethos operating here, I think.
That even within capitalism, you can find a bit of space, you can find the finance, etc., to organise a workplace along different lines, along cooperative lines, as was attempted here.
The concept of a community co-op was the original idea, and that did fit very well with the energies that were there. The people from UCC brought one strand to that energy.
So there would have been lots of discussions, lots of endless discussions about all kinds of important things, which were important, and the wonderful thing about the Quay Co-op that time was, one of the many wonderful things was that it attracted a lot of people who had a lot of ideas. There was a core group who were not going to let it slip away, okay? So unlike a lot of other attempts to do things around the city, it didn't get diffused and kind of lost and dissipated. It stayed very centred. And at the same time, it was very welcoming, it was very hospitable, and there were people here who had very different perspectives.
And that was actually quite interesting as well, because we tried to do everything by consensus, and there were a lot of very different characters involved. So the meetings used to go on and on and on.
So you had, on the political level, you had Stalinists and Trotskyists and Marxist-Leninists or whatever, and they would argue, and you had people who called themselves revolutionaries and people who said they were reformers, and you had these kind of debates and disagreements about how and what we should do. It was also a very tense time at that time. The politics in Ireland was very fragile.
Some people were extremely political. Some people were more interested in the practicalities, like the food co-op, or in providing vegetarian cooking. People were interested in providing a space for people to meet. There was a lot of different motivations, and it was stimulating, but sometimes it was also very, very hard work. And sometimes it was very hard to reach consensus. But we did try.
In so many work environments, you're not listened to. So I think it was really, really good that through, within co-ops, everybody plays a role in carrying out whatever decisions are made, and it's really, that makes for the success of a co-op.
It wasn't all sweetness and light. I have memories of not so much blazing rows, but raised voices at least. And, I stormed out of the odd meeting once or twice. But then later on, you went back to work side by side with the person you might have had a political disagreement with. But you in the kitchen, for example, you were peeling the potatoes or whatever side by side. And I thought that was very healthy. That for people to be able to express their views forcefully, and at the end of the process come to a collective agreement, and then we would all abide by that.
The co-op structure changed, where it went from being a community co-op to an actual workers co-op. And then at that point there was it went from a membership of about 120, and it went down to a core group between 12 and 20, I think, which were the core group of the workers co-op.
Well, from my perspective, the workers co-op aspect of it was absolutely number one. So for a socialist, I thought it was really important to be working somewhere like that, which was very alternative and quite unique at the time.
People weren't assigned roles as such, so there was no manager. So we were all learning how to manage a business, a workers' co-op at the same time. So that was challenging, of course. There were lots of different characters, some very forceful, some not so forceful. But, we combined our skills and we managed to get by.
There were a few very strong, powerful individuals who kept it going and who would move heaven and earth to make sure that this was not going to collapse.
I mean, I love Arthur, but my God, Arthur is a kind of maverick character. So he goes off and does his own thing, and always has done.
I remember a supplier coming to the door one day, and he said, "Is the boss around?" And somebody pointed out to him, well, actually, this is a cooperative and we don't have bosses. I'm looking for Arthur. And so both things were true at the same time. It was a cooperative, and we were very conscious of that and very proud that we were working under those structures where decisions were made jointly, where there wasn't a hierarchy. So that was very important. The other side was true as well, that Arthur was the driving force, both practically and philosophically, as it were.
If you want to try and start something up, you're going against what lots of people are believing. Yes, you need total determination. You have to believe things that really you shouldn't believe because nobody else does. So you have to be a little bit irrational to kind of do that. And the Quay Co-op was very lucky that it had some people who had that kind of total commitment.
Does it work? It does work. I mean, we are here, I think we'll be here 40 years next year, and we employ 60 people in an ideal scenario. But it's hard. It gives us, there's huge scope for debate and discussion, and so everybody is listened to, and any ideas that are put forward can come from anywhere, can come from the ground up, and the co-op has always been a reflection of that. But also that can at times be incredibly frustrating because, you know, a bit of a cliche, but when everything is being managed by committee, you can actually be quite sluggish, and sometimes things need to be pushed a little bit.
Working in different places, there is a certain different vibe. It's very much, you're here, management or whatever is there, bosses, owners, whatever it is. In here, yeah, there's members, there's managers, there's staff, but it's like this one big bubble of family. It's the only way you can describe it is like a family feel. It's like being home. For me, this is second home.
So one day when I was shopping, I was saying, is there any jobs going here? And I got a job upstairs in the restaurant in 1990 and stayed there for 2 or 3 years until the position came in the shop. I ran down the stairs to the shop because that's where I got into retail more than cafe work, you know what I mean?
I came here initially for a few months in the summer, about 14 years ago. And I'm still here because I think it's very hard to describe the co-op. I suppose the word family is the only thing that comes to mind. You know, there's just something very unique about it. And I think that's all part of the history, where it came from. Expansion is important, and we've become quite stagnant over the last number of years because we've developed so much building-wise and shop-wise that we kind of let the membership fall a little bit. So it's something we really need to reinvigorate because it's the heart of the company as well.
And it's good to have models of other ways of organising society. And I think the cooperative nature of the Quay Co-op sent out a very strong signal in that regard.
I thought it was a great place to work. You know, we'd have our moments. And like, I was working in the cafe. It's not like I had some major role, but I felt I was valued. So anybody who walked in the door, that was fine. They were welcome. There was that kind of sense of, it didn't matter what you looked like or who you were or what your sexuality was or anything.
No day was the same, and it wasn't just like working in an ordinary cafe, restaurant, whatever. Because there was so much else going on. It was like a very multi-layered kind of place to be working. Arthur was working in the cafe when I worked there, and Arthur would disappear. He'd be meant to be sort of like on the counter serving, and I'd look around, Arthur wasn't there, and the next thing somebody would say, oh, Arthur just went over. Arthur had to go over to the other place, meaning the other place, to do something or to take a phone call, or somebody wanted to, and he'd be involved in like lots of different things, and so he'd disappear because like something got in the way, and that used to happen quite a bit, and it wasn't just Arthur.
So, for instance, the office where I was working was right behind the cafe, and there was no phone in the office, so the phone to make, calls to the bank or whatever was right outside the office door. But it was a pay phone, and it was also used by customers of the co-op, of the restaurant and that. So I would have to keep an eye on who was in the cafe if I wanted to make a call. And particularly, you know, there'd be particular people who I would know were going to use the payphone and often would be on it for a long, long time, so I'd be waiting to make my phone call.
A number of the women involved here were women who were, when I say young, I don't mean children, but women in their early 20s with children on their own, with a child or children on their own for one reason or another. And they were another group that were in here, and they were involved and they were working, and it was possible for them to do that because in some chaotic way, the building was child friendly. Like I remember there was again, it wouldn't be acceptable nowadays, but like there were child nappy changing stations in places around, which was not something you found around the town at that stage.
And that was a time where working women, you know, could not, it was almost like you had to hide the fact that you were children. You had to prove that having a child made absolutely no difference to your life. You know, that was the attitude. So it was different here. You know, it was okay to acknowledge the fact that this is you have other responsibilities as well. People like myself with small children, when Joni Barron came back to Cork and herself and others opened Wallaroo, that was an amazing place.
So when I came back from America, my plan was to set up some kind of educational establishment. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I had spent 3 years in Los Angeles working at an alternative free school. And my idea was that I would use the philosophy of that school to try and get something going here. And because the co-op at that stage had a policy of having 50% of the women employed, they also realised that they would need childcare for that. So I had a discussion with the co-op about, you know, if we could set up another place that was, you know, would take care of the co-op children, but also other children as well, that I would be interested in having a joint venture.
It was a really vibrant, child-friendly, very creative as well. So my daughter went there and she loved it, and it was really nice for me to know that she was being really well looked after there. And you know, that's still going, and I'm not surprised.
Really, it's about empowering children, and it really fitted in with the co-op because the co-op was always about empowering and being activist and having a political slant to it.
So I suppose over the years, a lot of campaigns and you know, have been organised or came out of the co-op or were supported very much by the co-op.
Unfortunately, many of these campaigns at that time we lost, but one of the big ones, for instance, major one was the anti-amendment campaign.
Attempting to not put the Eighth Amendment into the Constitution, an effort that failed, but it was a strong effort.
That was a titanic struggle between the left and the very right in Ireland.
And the co-op was only just beginning really on its baby feet, so that was very daring. It was the centre really of the anti-amendment campaign in Cork.
So that involved, you know, marches and leafleting and you know, we even went door to door leafleting, and you know, very often it was not a nice experience. You know, you wouldn't be welcomed.
The anti-amendment campaigns were quite scary sometimes because people were quite angry, and that's when I saw Cork, as I presume the rest of Ireland was. That's when you would see just how conservative things were, because people got quite aggressive, and quite elderly people got quite aggressive when we were campaigning.
The amendment was passed, and that was, I think, a really wake-up call for an awful lot of people in Ireland, really, as to the kind of society that was emerging.
Only one state in the world allowed abortion on demand. That was Russia under Stalin. Now almost every country practices it, and Ireland is the great exception. Why the extraordinary change in opinion?
I suppose within the co-op here it was our first measure of the kind of opposition to any progressive kind of change that was there, because the abortion amendment was about much more than abortion in a sense. It was about the whole nature of Irish society.
That's what the amendment was about. It was about a fight back against the progress that had been made to scupper any further opportunities of progress opening up for lesbians and gay men, for women, etc.
And the co-op, I think, grew very much in that space within that campaign.
I think, sometimes people see activism as very kind of boxed off, that you had the lesbians and gays here, or sometimes you had the gays here and the lesbians here, and you had the environmentalists there, you had the more kind of left-wing radicals kind of over there. But I think the co-op facilitated much more interaction between people. So you had lesbian and gay groups very actively involved in something like the anti-amendment campaign. And, if there was an event happening, the co-op was a source of support for that.
The Defend the Clinics campaign, which I suppose was started up in 86, 87, following on from an injunction that was slapped on the Well Woman and open door counselling services in Dublin, that they couldn't provide any information around abortion. So a nationwide campaign was started in, I think, early 87 to sort of challenge that. So we started a group in Cork.
It was great to have this place or a space to be able to, build your campaign.
And we operated a kind of a telephone service there on a Monday evening. But it was all very clandestine because we were in danger of having an injunction slapped on ourselves as well. So, at times we used to have to go out in the dead of night, kind of spray painting telephone numbers on walls around the city and what have you. I mean, at the time there was very little opportunity for women to find out information because everything had been blocked through the media.
The first divorce referendum was, and the abortion referendum, the first one as well, they were hugely disappointing that those weren't kind of, if you want to use that term, successful. But I think a number of people here saw that work on these issues is actually about the long game and that you need to take the long view. And this is about changing legislation.
So there was a range of health issues and social issues, environmental issues that the co-op was able to air and promote.
And in December 1983, a group of us went from the Women's Place in the Quay Co-op to Greenham Common, to the peace camp there, that where you had women who were living around a base which housed cruise missiles. And in December 1983, the women of Greenham Common asked other women to come and join them so that there would be enough women to surround the base. So a group of us travelled on the bus and boat from Cork over to Greenham Common in a freezing cold December. Having access to that experience, which I think was facilitated for me by having access to the Women's Place in the co-op. So it was just amazing. And then when we came back from Greenham Common, it was like, okay, what next?
Rallies in Dublin, we all met here. The banners for all the campaigns were made downstairs on the floor, and Arthur there hammering together the frames. We were spray painting the various banners for all the campaigns.
The co-op was a place to meet, I'm not sure what the booking system was like, but there was a book and you could go through the diary, and there were regular meetings of all sorts of groups. But in addition, there was mutual support. So, for example, though I was involved inside the Social Society in UCC, and we would regularly meet here, if there was a march or a demonstration around gay rights, we would come along. So there was a great possibility to give each other support.
It became the hub in Cork, and by providing a hub, it meant that everybody else was stronger. And it also meant that small groups who were very concerned about some issue, they felt that they weren't alone. And it was that sense of solidarity that was extremely important. In fact, at that time, I would say that building solidarity between socialists, between gay and lesbians, between women, it was the solidarity aspect of it that was the defining characteristic of the Quay Co-op. You were in it because everybody is facing these kinds of issues, and you are only going to resolve them if you pull together in solidarity.
But the huge one was the campaign against Reagan's foreign policy. This was the time now when the world was on the brink of nuclear war between the Soviet Union, as it was then, and the West. And Ronald Reagan was kind of spiralling us towards this kind of nuclear disaster. And yet he was coming to Ballyporeen, County Tipperary. And we were part of the national movement to really have a strong voice about saying not in our name, you know, on behalf of those that are suffering in Central and South America, the arms race, etc. So the campaign hub was upstairs from here, and this is where we trained for non-violent direct action, like, you know, sort of in the sphere of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, in the event of the special branch knocking on our doors, or in the event of police taking us when we were doing sit-ins in Ballyporeen, and many other actions. And so in the room upstairs, when we were discussing how would we react and respond, what could we do against the power of America and the power of our own state, we decided, you know, keep it simple. And we decided to do sit-ins in Ballyporeen. We decided to set up a women's peace camp, which we did right across the street from the Ronald Reagan Inn. And then those that were more brave and courageous prepared for a very brazen act, which was to bring a van load of big bags of lime, and they went up the side of the hillside, very steep in mist and rain and fog and everything, and brought up bags and bags of lime with the intention of spelling out, which they did, wonderful words: remember Oscar Romero, that beautiful man who was shot while, you know, saying mass in Central America, and was shot by the forces. And then we had a big, large cross under that. And we were prepared, actually, that the team that did that, led by Arthur Leahy and my own husband Sean, who was the driver of the van, and we were afraid that they were going to be arrested. Now, we did get visited by the special branch and everything during that time. I'm sure there was, you know, potentially infiltration here, who knows, but the thing is, the strength and the spirit of the movement and where we were coming from within ourselves was stronger than the power of any infiltration or any visits from the special branch.
At that time, they wanted to give more power to the Gardaí. It's since gone way further, far worse actually. But at that time, the Criminal Justice Bill was a significant campaign, and one actually which the Quay Co-op absolutely led in Cork.
But the point about the Criminal Justice Act, as it is now, is that it was recognised and anticipated at the time that if it came onto the statute books, it would constitute a very repressive piece of legislation.
To give you an idea of some of the kind of innovative things that were done that came up during the meetings, just some people's ideas. One was, there was a van that was belonging to one of the members, and we did a little play, staged a small play about what would happen if the Criminal Justice Bill became an act and it came in. And the van was driven around different parts of Cork into estates, and we gave out leaflets and we called people to come and look at the play. A lot of young people came. There were a lot of bemused looks in terms of what on earth are we up to. But we did actually manage to raise quite a bit of discussion, certainly. A lot of people simply weren't aware that these things were happening at all. And a lot of what the Quay Co-op was doing was trying to raise awareness.
And I think it was a real mix of people involved in campaigns like Condom Sense, which are challenging the kind of archaic kind of rules in terms of access to contraception. And I think it's really difficult for people now to understand that you couldn't access contraception in the 1980s, that it was so difficult, that something as basic as being able to buy condoms was such a big contentious issue.
We're doing a leafleting stall here today on Valentine's Day as a protest. The campaign is essentially about civil disobedience. We have decided to break the law which restricts people from access to condoms when and where they need them. As you know, condoms are only available in chemist shops and a few other outlets, so it's very hard for people to get condoms at the times when they need them. What we think people should be able to do is to buy condoms from slot machines in pubs and nightclubs.
late at night, at weekends, at times when it's really impractical for people to get them at the moment. That's the purpose of today's action, to put pressure on the government to actually change the laws.
And then there was a number of centres around town where we tried to get condom machines. We ordered machines through a company in Dublin that was trying to establish them, and we set them around the kind of, I think from Galway down to Cork, we had these machines, and they weren't very good machines. They were made of timber or something. They used to keep blocking, and we used to get calls in the middle of the night, you know, usually at about 11:15 on a Friday night, you know, saying, oh, money is stuck and I can't get, you know, so.
A packet of condoms. The bishop is browsing, trying out different brands of hair restorer on the palms of his hands. The assistant is timing 3 flies dying noisily from a new improved insecticide. I approach the counter and with practiced ease deliver my list. A packet of aspirin, a box of plasters, a tube of toothpaste, a roll of lint, a bottle of eye lotion, a tin of throat lozenges, hairspray, foot powder, mouthwash, roll-on deodorant, a jar of Vaseline, a tin of liver salts, and a packet of condoms. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Says the assistant, winking at the bishop. A 12-inch dildo, an inflatable doll, a vibrator with double action and variable speed, a selection of French ticklers, a bottle of hard-up, stay-up lotion, and a packet of condoms. Please.
The Dun Stores campaign that was taken up, that was the anti-apartheid campaign that was taken up at an early stage by the Quay Co-op. We did a huge amount of fundraising, of course joined the picket lines and supported the picketers who are here. It was a really interesting campaign because it was the Dun Stores strike was something that was happening, that was created by very ordinary people, workers in Duns who wouldn't have regarded themselves as being political. Actually, they weren't following initially instructions from their own trade union, but they also were doing it because they simply felt it was the right thing to do. And they walked out. They would not handle the goods. It was quite an amazing thing from that point of view. And I think to have support then from others on the outside, like the Quay Co-op, was extremely important to that campaign, which was successful in the end. I mean, they were a brilliant and courageous group of women.
I suppose there have been many movements and campaigns and activities that have come out of the Quay Co-op. The one that meant the most to me in recent years was the marriage referendum, marriage equality, in 2015. And now that didn't specifically come out of the Quay Co-op, but we very much supported it. A number of us here stayed working here and had our wages paid here, but we got involved in the campaign for the months leading up to it.
The headquarters we had was on North Mall. So myself and Arthur and a few others were members on that committee, and we got involved a lot. We give a lot of our time to it, again thanks to the Quay Co-op. A lot of our time was spent over there. My role, I suppose, a lot of people went around canvassing, which was fantastic. My role was slightly different. I ended up going around to different places in Cork, Waterford and Tipperary, giving talks and discussions on marriage equality. And that took a lot of my time.
And that was a wonderful campaign to see a whole new generation of young people from all corners of the city in terms of their orientation, working together magnificently and creatively and ultimately successfully.
The final result on the referendum, which I think was about 62 in favour, wasn't, I don't think, reflective of the work done the 6 months before. It was reflective more so of the work that had been done over the years previously, but also how much Ireland had changed.
That was a very special time for us and for a lot of us here, and for the committee members all involved in the referendum at the time. It was again a real focus of something we needed to do and we felt had to be done, and it was only right. So yeah, that was, and I saw it smiling because it was happy memories. Of course, I mean, the result was just amazing, and those few days around the result, before and after, and during and after the result, was just, it always brings a smile to my face, that sense of justice.
When that referendum happened, and though it was like, it's very simple, question is, do you think it's okay for same-sex couples to get married? For me, I think in reality it was about, is Ireland now okay with gay people? And by being asked if gay people could get married, if gay couples could get married just the same as everybody else, then they were fully accepted really in society. And I found that referendum like just hugely emotional and empowering and rewarding.
I mean, I must say, in the early days of it, I was quite surprised when I was told it was going to be vegetarian, and that was one person, Cecilia, who was had strong ideas around food, and she just kind of got everybody else on board.
And she was great. She was really great. She was very creative, and there was great food, because what the ingredients were a bit random, I imagine, depending on what somebody had bought and so on. But she used to have great menus and great food.
And part of the whole ethos was that not only was this going to be a vegetarian restaurant, but actually it was a whole food vegetarian restaurant. So it had a whole approach to the politics of food, how we produce food, how we consume food.
But we all ended up being vegetarian. And, you know, so that element then grew within the co-op and became part of its identity.
As a vegetarian, and it was very difficult at that stage to be one in Ireland. I was looked on kind of as an oddball, and restaurants and pubs were like toasted cheese sandwiches that were put in cling film and put in the microwave and plopped, and salads were white lettuce with an egg, hard-boiled egg with a glob of white stuff on it. And so it was like, yeah, it was difficult to adjust to.
You know, as a vegetarian back in those days, it was very difficult to find food to go out to a restaurant. So the co-op was my natural place for lunches or dinners. You know, I probably ate here several times a week.
I mean, it was great to go and have a coffee and cake where you were likely to meet like-minded people or to bump into friends and colleagues and to pick up on the gossip on what was happening. But the co-op restaurant was, you know, you got a decent meal, a decent healthy meal for a reasonable price.
I have very happy memories of the restaurant part, or the cafe it was called, the cafe part of the Quay Co-op in the early days. It really was a great place to come into. You know, it was lovely. I mean, the food was good, but it was lovely. There was a great atmosphere. It was very, very friendly.
So the cafe was it provided food, but it also provided, I think, a safe space for a lot of people.
But my favourite bit was 12 or half 12 would come. The place would be again heaving with people. Divine food, great conversation, interesting people. And actually, once the word kind of spread globally that the Quay Co-op existed, anyone passing through on their way to Timbuktu or somewhere all popped in here. So you used to have great, interesting conversation.
I mean, the mix was hugely diverse. So we get students, we get just people who are working in Cork, you know, just in offices.
Artists, musicians, just people who like the food. So, you know, it would be really buzzy at lunchtime. But even during the day, you'd come out to have your tea break, and, you know, you'd go to people that, you know, and you'd kind of, but before you sit down, you'd always say, is this a meeting? Because there were so many kind of informal meetings and groups, and very often it would be, so you'd kind of join somebody else. So there was a huge amount of activity and planning and organising going on here all the time.
As the kind of more stronger political identity moved out of the co-op, then the development of the politics of food, and that became much more an element of what the co-op represented. And it developed, you know, the shop developed, and then there was other shops were opened.
And so it's more of a working place now of its own, a restaurant. and cafe. And so naturally, the people who were involved in the campaigning activities in the early days come here now as customers or for the chats. But of course, it's different. It's different in a good way because also it has seeded activities out in other places. Other people have gone out of here, have set up their own businesses, have set up their own restaurants. Other campaign groups have now become established, have a secure footing in places of their own. All of that has been eased. I won't say it wouldn't have happened without the Quay Co-op, but it certainly wouldn't have happened in the same way or to the same timescale.
All the food that the Quay Co-op was producing was being produced solely for the restaurant. And then as the shop on Sullivan's Quay expanded, and like we originated in number 24, and then in the late 80s we expanded into number 25, and then we expanded into number 23 into the old fire station. When we expanded into the fire station, we decided then at that time, which we've been thinking about for quite a while, was to start producing our own line. So a lot of the soups and the dishes that we were already producing for the restaurant, we started packaging them and getting stickers put on them and our own logo and that. So we couldn't do that in the restaurant kitchen anymore, so that's why we set up a food production kitchen.
The setup now is that there's a separate food production bakery, warehouse, where they keep all our veg that we get brought in and stuff. Yeah, it's over on Cove Street, so completely separate unit to here.
We are currently setting up an online shop, and I currently have responsibility for developing that. So that's reinventing the website and setting up an online shop.
It's massive, the progression that the Quay Co-op has made from this little cafe bookshop to 3 stores, an online store and a whole food production area. It's massive, massive progression.
A lot of people come and they stay, especially in the shop. Like we'd Phyllis, who retired there about 3 years ago. Like she was here 30 years. I'm here 30 years. Yvonne now, who's downstairs, she's here 20 years. Brian is here longer again. Brian's here since it started.
Even though the structurally it's changed and business-wise it's changed, I don't feel that though. I still feel it's the co-op.
They commercialised themselves to make sure that it was a living, vibrant entity, but never lost the heart or the core. That beating heart and pulse is still there, and that's what I love about it. It hasn't lost its essence.
The restaurant has been, has been closed now for over a year, and that's had a critical effect on the co-op.
I remember the week so clearly. We sat down and had a meeting on, I think it was the 16th of March in 2020, the 6 of us at the time, and we decided for the first time we would not open the restaurant on St. Patrick's Day, the following day. And among other things, and I remember going around that evening and I let like 8 people go on one evening, just said, we're not reopening, we don't have work there. And that was incredibly difficult.
Now the co-op has survived because the shops are part of the essential infrastructure that's required, and the food production is still working, so it hasn't affected us as much as in practical terms.
I'd never forget the Thursday, never forget it. Last year, and it was a March Thursday when they announced that the schools were closing. That was it, no schools on the Friday. We were pandemonium. It was like the world ended. People couldn't get enough food. I mean, we were like that for months. It was surreal, it really was.
Very busy, because people didn't have money to spend on holidays or pubs or anything like that. So they were cooking and baking, and it was unbelievable.
It's like you never think in your lifetime that you would live through something like this. And then it happens, but fortunately for us, we were working, so we were able to just keep going. I mean, it was stressful, don't get me, it was very stressful to begin with, but you kind of get on with it. You have no choice, you have to get on with
it. In terms of where we go next, I think a lot of the really dramatic changes in the co-op are behind us, and I think changing from where we were in the early days into a business and a reasonably large employer. But I'd imagine into the future it will be kind of sort of steady as she goes, you know.
I suppose at kind of my age, I suppose I'll kind of be handing over somebody else to express that. I think it's the next generation that really has to re-identify what the co-op means, you know, or what is its relevance. But there is a lot of hovering energy that's there.
Yeah, the co-op continues to play an important role in the life of the city. The health food store, organic foods, etc., vegetarian provisions. There is a bookshop there again. It's second-hand books, but a fascinating collection.
I suppose I'd like to see it not lose that radical activism that it began with.
I think the whole ideal of the co-op being a workers' co-op needs to be looked at again.
As an interested political person, let's put it that way, I do want to see the co-op re-established as a fully functioning workers' cooperative, not least because that's what it says on the label.
I hope that it would continue the way it is, really. That I wouldn't like to see it change too much, you know, and I don't think it would because of the people involved, you know. I don't think they'd let that happen.
I know it will go from strength to strength. I know it will.
I think we're really, really lucky here to have a place like this, you know, and like I say, kind of a home away from home, you know. So just want to express to everyone who's contributed a big thank you, you know.
I think we can never, ever undervalue the impact that the Quay Co-op had, and I believe that it had a huge influence over generations, particularly of course because it is Munster-based and it is Cork-based in our own region, but because of the mobility of people, I think the message from here went out far and wide.
I think where we are now, like where Ireland is now compared to where we were in 1982 when the co-op was set up first, of course that's not down to the Quay Co-op, but I think what the co-op did a lot of is one, it kind of pushed boundaries all the time. So like that thing of just all the time, you know, hanging a banner outside over the top of the building, just saying, we believe in this or we support this, or just by coming in here and just seeing what the place was about. Then I think we pushed boundaries, we encouraged, you know, thought, ideas.
Like people used to go in there who had nothing whatsoever to do with, you know, any of the campaigns, and so I think what they saw, like if they came in, you know, for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, that first of all, gay people, for example, were, you know, just ordinary people, you know, that you could chat to, and that, you know, people who had left-wing views weren't like from outer space.
So that's the nature of struggle as well for people, I might say. That, you know, it's nice to say when you look back to think it all just happened. Whoopee, change happens. Change is created, and it's created by people coming together one by one and in groups, and it's by keeping going, not giving up. And that's what the Quay Co-op represented.
None of these changes or political changes would have happened unless we had all those discussions, meetings till all hours of the night sometimes, and meetings every week, every month for years, and all of those people who worked to get things changed.
Because I remember going around during the referendum campaign and talking to people, and a lot of young guys, you know, 16, 17, 18 years of age, and who don't realise what was done 30, 40 years ago for them in 2021. You know, the work, the energy, you know, that people gave all those years ago. And in just this small little area in the Quay Co-op that has changed Ireland, you know, and it shouldn't be forgotten.
I would say, with regard to people who worked here, you know, there was a solid group of 20, 30, 40 people who put enormous effort, time, unpaid, and energy into establishing this place, enormous energy. And You know, that's obviously something that I need to acknowledge, I want to acknowledge, because I know something about the time and effort that they put into this place, and it's still standing. And you know, it's a fantastic tribute to all of those people.
It was being part of really that kind of collective experience. I think that was one of the really nice things, that you could live in your own city, the city you were born and grew up in. You could be different, whatever way that difference manifested itself, and you should have a voice at the table.
It brought about change because it allowed people to organise, it had an educational role, but also I wouldn't discount the lower level changes, the help it gave to people, the help the co-op gave to individuals. There was in terms of counselling, in terms of helplines for young gay people. There was a range of low-level social support to individuals who otherwise may have felt an urge to leave the country, or who may have felt isolated in their lives.
And obviously for the gay movement in Cork, I think Cork and the Quay Co-op and the gay movement here had a huge impact nationally.
But it was always part of an energy that was growing and developing in Ireland. You know, it wasn't the exclusive. The energy existed out in the city, in different places, in the universities, in different political groups that were around the city. You know, and the co-op became a kind of a. I'm not sure if it was always seen as a supportive entity to that, but it was always a kind of a focus for that energy.
So it was very much around not being insular, not just looking in, but looking out, looking at what society do we live in and what society do we want to live in. So in lots of ways it was very idealistic. And I think what's amazing is that so much of that idealism transformed into activism, which then fundamentally changed the worlds in which we live. You know, so I think the Quay Co-op made a huge change to what it's like to live, not just in Cork, but in Ireland.